And welcome everyone to this edition of Quarantine Q&A. It is presented by Alabama One Credit Union. This is Roger Hoover with the Crimson Tide Sports Network and Alabama One Credit Union. They've been voted Tuscaloosa's best credit union and best mortgage lender. Alabama One offers low-rate auto, mortgage, and business loans, plus protection for it all with Alabama One Insurance. You can visit any of their 9 local branches or check them out online at alabamaone.org. Alabama One, a proud partner of Crimson Tide Athletics. Well, it's certainly great to be joined by the voice of Crimson Tide football, Eli Gold, from his home. And Eli, it's just starting to feel a little bit more like football season, knowing you and I are talking on June 3rd. How's everything going for you?
Everything is well, thanks. The family is well, and we're doing okay. Still quarantining, whether it's here or at our little lake place, but we're kind of hanging to ourselves. But that's what you got to do at this point. So, but yes, getting ready to close in on football. It's sounding a little more optimistic that that there might well be a season come September. Obviously, there are a lot of questions yet to be answered, but I feel a little more optimistic now than maybe I did a 3 months ago.
Yeah, you and I talked pretty early on in this process back in early April before a spring update show that we had across the network, and now I'm sure you're excited for what's coming up this Saturday with a summer show presented by Aflac.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun show. We have really, if I do say so myself, we have really outdone ourselves with the lineup. We've got the university president, Dr. Stuart Bell. He'll open up the show. We've got Greg Byrne, our director of athletics. We've got Brian Hainline. Brian is the chief medical officer for the NCAA, and with obviously all the COVID-19 stuff going on, I'm sure he's going to have some very interesting things to say. We've got Bob Baumhauer stopping by to visit just to see how he and his restaurants are doing. And that's the first hour. In the second hour, we've got Reese Davis, Alabama grad, of course, from ESPN, the host of College Game Day. We've got John Parker Wilson and Rashad Johnson and Nick Saban. So all of that will be crammed into a 2-hour time slot Saturday morning from 10 o'clock until 12 o'clock.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to that. We'll have that available on our Facebook page as well for people to listen to. And you mentioned an interesting guest, a great assembly of guests that you have coming up for that show. But Brian Hainline, what are you most looking forward to asking him? What's on your mind to get from him?
Well, all sorts of things. First, a lot of our listeners and viewers will have never heard of him. So we're going to establish who he is, what are his credentials. I want to talk about the fact that when he was first hired by the NCAA, one of the first schools he visited was the University of Alabama. And it wasn't because he was going alphabetically. He was very complimentary of Coach Saban's approach to the medical care for the players. Brian is also very, very passionate about mental health of student athletes, and I want to talk to him about that. And of course, I will talk about this COVID-19 and what type of recommendations the NCAA might have, even though universities are entities that can decide for themselves what needs to be done. But so we'll talk about a lot of things in that general vein.
Certainly looking forward to hearing his observations, as well as Greg Byrne. We've had him on a Q&A just like this, and he's really been busy, as I'm sure you know, with all the different planning that's going on for the fall, because a lot of questions that you and I may have, he's asking himself and trying to figure out from his staff. So his insights are really going to be fascinating.
They are going to be a lot of fun. I did an interview it wasn't an interview. He and I were on a Zoom conference last night with over 600 Red Elephant Club members. And we talked extensively, some of which, we will not talk about in this setting, but, there's far more to this than anybody thinks about as far as implementing games and, what do you do about tailgating? How do you handle concession stands where, can people really stay 6 feet apart at a concession stand? The restrooms, how do you stay 6 feet apart in the restrooms? There are a lot of things if indeed attendance becomes a factor. If it becomes that, X number of percentage of seats will or won't be used, he has to deal with all of that along with all the committees at the university that are that are working on that. They've got student athletes starting to report, in dribs and drabs already, and football players can be in on Monday to deal with, workouts, not with the regular coaches, but they can do strength and conditioning stuff. So there's lots to consider at this point. There really is.
And lots to consider as well for Coach Saban. And I remember when we had our last quarantine Q&A, you talked about the early days and before the 2007 season even started, how he took an active role with the Alabama students. So that really shouldn't surprise you when you look at the active role he's taking in bringing awareness to social distancing and what people need to do in order for there to be football.
Yeah, no, Coach Saban is, he knows what it's all about. He understands, what we're all facing. But he does it in a good way. Number one, obviously, a head football coach in this state is eminently respected. So he already has people's ears. Then he did that great public service announcement, he and Jeff Allen and Big Al, talking about wearing masks and so on. So yes, it's a big responsibility. And I think when we did talk about it, we've also mentioned back when the tornadoes came through Tuscaloosa, how the coach realized that he is more than just a football coach. He is a community leader, exclusive of the X's and the O's, and how people do listen to him. They want to hear from him. So yeah, it's a serious time in our country, and everybody's doing what they can to try and build respect and bring everybody along on this together.
And for you, what have the last few weeks been like? First of all, you've been staying healthy along with your family.
Yes, we have been, quarantining, basically staying out of everybody's way. As I mentioned, we're blessed to have a little cottage down at the lake, so we have either been here at our home or at the lake place, but you can still keep your distance. Which is what we've done, or, even if you get out on your boat, it's the two of us. So we can, we have another couple that we know, and they have been quarantining, and occasionally they'll come out and they'll sit at the front end of the boat and we'll sit at the back end of the boat. But, we're doing fine. I'm in the process of reading more books. I stayed up last night till 3 a.m, couldn't quite finish. I have a rule that if you're reading a book, and if it falls on your face 3 times, it's time to turn the light out, take your glasses off, and go to bed. But it's a great book. I'm reading Elton John's book called Me, which details his entire life back to his youth when he was Reginald Dwight, and had issues with his parents all the way to his current day. So I'm about 3/4 of the way through that. I've read, one of my dear friends is JR, Jim Ross, who has been one of the preeminent wrestling announcers in America for many different sanctioning bodies. I've known JR for years. Not that you would necessarily find me at ringside or underneath one of those masks, but JR and I have been good friends, and he's written 2 books. So I have read those. I read a book about Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I read a book about her. So I've caught up, like a lot of us, we get books for birthdays, you get books for Christmas, for Hanukkah, for whatever, and then it's in the middle of a busy time. So you put it on the stack and you'll say, okay, I'll get to it. Well, I'm finally getting to them. So I've been sitting out on the back porch and reading until last night when I got into bed and read and read and read. Next thing I knew, it was 3 o'clock in the morning and the book was on my face. So, but that's what I've been doing basically. A lot of things like this. I've been on a number of interview shows over the last while, and just trying to stay in touch with the Bama faithful out there.
And without games right now, everybody is in a very reflective mood about Alabama's history, and obviously we've done that on the network by re-airing some classic games, and that will continue for the next couple weeks. And I know people are really excited about what's coming up this week, looking back to Alabama against Georgia 2017, and 2nd and 26 is still the iconic play. Your iconic call is right there. I'm sure great memories of a great night in Atlanta.
It was unbelievable. But I keep telling people, they say, man, that was a great game. And I say, well, it wasn't a great game. It was a great finish. The right team won. But, from I don't know what you're like or the fans, they might disagree, but when Bama's trailing and when Bama's not moving the ball, I'm not real happy. I'm not real comfortable. Whether it sounds that way or not behind the mic, I don't know, but I'm not real comfortable. And even in the second half, when Tua came in, obviously there was life. There was a spark that reignited the offense. But then there was still scoring by Georgia, and I was just concerned. And then the missed field goal forcing overtime, and then you say to yourself, well, we had a chance there, and we've now you don't, and who knows? So it was for me a nerve-wracking night. These nails, which have grown back some and have been cut since, but they were nibbled down to the quick that evening. So it was a great finish, a spectacular finish, obviously. But for much of the evening, I was kind of in an ill mood because the wrong guys weren't on top of the scoreboard.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. And not only are people reflecting on Alabama's great wins and great history at this time, but even during the course of this past week, we have lost two legends in SEC football. Two coaching legends have passed away. First, want to get your memories of the legendary Auburn coach and a former Alabama assistant, Pat Dye.
A nice man, not to say that I knew him all that well, but like, back in the day, we used to do interviews with the opposing coach on our broadcasts, something that we don't do now necessarily unless you get it off a mass interview of sorts. But so he knew me well enough to call me by name and so on and so forth. What I really am happy about is that last year I was asked to attend a fundraiser in Mobile, raising money for a private school in Pritchard, Alabama, the Pritchard School. It was myself, it was Taylor Zarzer from ESPN, who is a Mobilian, and of course that's right there in the area. We had a number of other people on the panel, including Pat Dye. And we had lunch together, and then everybody kind of scattered off for a moment or so, for more than a moment or so, and Coach Dye and I were just sitting there at this table together. We had a turkey sandwich and little coleslaw, and we were nibbling on our lunches and so on. But he and I talked for about 20 minutes. Just sat there, shared a few stories, talked about his family, my family, and that was, as it turns out now, the last contact I had with him. But it's memorable, and I'm glad I had that opportunity to sit down with the man, because he was always so very respectful, even though we were on a different side of the rooting interest. But he was always, the few times we did have dealings, he was always so respectful, and he's going to be missed.
Certainly will be, and one of his visions was to bring the Iron Bowl to on campus, or in his view, really get it to Auburn, and you were there for that game in 1989. What do you recall about that atmosphere? It was a tough afternoon for Alabama, but it ushered in getting the games to Auburn and then later down the road to Tuscaloosa, and it's now kind of hard for some younger fans to even remember what it was like back at Legion Field.
Right. Back in Legion Field, you had the 50-50 ticket split. One side of the stadium was crimson and white, one was orange and blue. But he was instrumental in making that on. I remember that first game. Of course, now I had never been to Auburn for football before then. I had been there for basketball. At that time, I was doing, Bama hoops. But I was never there for a football game. And I didn't know, and this shows how close people in this conference really are, the worker bees. I didn't know the traffic flow at Auburn during the football weekends. I didn't know anything about the parking. It was nothing. No school was nearly as organized as the schools are now. Anyway, Alabama stayed in Montgomery on that Friday night, as they still do. They still stay in Montgomery on the Friday before the Iron Bowl when it's at Auburn. And I called my buddy, who lived in Montgomery, and I said, "Hey, what are the chances of you driving me to the stadium?" I said, "I don't know the flow. I don't know anything. Is there a way you can take me? Could I ride with you?" And my buddy said, "Sure." He said, "I'll pick you up at the hotel. We'll go together." I said, "Okay." Well, my buddy was Jim Fife, the voice of the Auburn Tigers. And he lived in Montgomery. He used to work for WLWI radio at the time. And he picked me up in front of the hotel. I jumped in the car and off we went to Auburn. Of course, he had the very good parking spot, as you would imagine, as you know, as we're lucky to have for our home games. He had the spot. The looks, though, I mean, we would go down. We were going down 85, Interstate 85, heading towards the Wire Road exit. And every now and then somebody would look into a car. You know how you do when you go past, you kind of look into a car, and they would see Jim and they'd see me, but they weren't sure if it was me. You know, it was one of those things. But then when we got out of the car together in the priority parking lot, whatever they call it, whatever the name was, but the priority parking lot right up against the stadium, and out of this door comes Jim Fife, and out of this door comes Eli Gold. It was just, people were incredulous. They just, I mean, the stares we got. And it was early. Jim said, "Look, we better get there real early." I forget if it was a 2:30 game or whatever, but we were there shortly after the sun came up. And I remember we went up. People were pointing and this and that and yelling and the whole schmidt. Nice, you know, good stuff. We went up to the press box, and Jim showed me where our booth was. And then he said, "You know, get yourself set and come on down and kill some time in my booth." And I did. We went down to the booth. I set up, I put some papers down in our booth, and I went down the other end of the press box and sat down, and we just read the paper. Jim was sitting there. "You want a cup of coffee?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be nice, thank you," and this and this. And we sat and talked for, heck, a couple hours before Jim had to leave and go off and take care of some pregame responsibilities. But those are the memories of that first game that I remember. As you said, Bama didn't win, but I remember Jim driving me and us getting out of the car to a group of incredulous stares from the fans who couldn't believe that the two of us were exiting the same vehicle together.
That is a really good story about Alabama's first trip to Auburn back in 1989. And another coach from that era that we just lost earlier today was Tennessee's Johnny Majors, legendary player at Tennessee, and then longtime head coach of the Volunteers. Any personal memories of him?
Not as many. I think I might have done an interview or two with Coach Majors. The thing that I still dislike about the man, and I say that respectfully, folks, I'm not talking poorly about the deceased. He is the guy who's responsible for those light orange numbers on the white jerseys that you can't see. He's the guy responsible for the light orange jersey with the white numbers that you can't see from the press box. You can see him on TV, but back in those days, teams used to trade coaching tapes. When you played whomever the next week, you had to send them some tapes of your games. They had to send, because there was no internet in those days. There was no video trade services. There were no, FTP places to go and get all this stuff. So you used to trade coaches' films, and they were often in black and white. And of course, the coach's film is from up high in the end zone. We would call it an all 22. You would see all 22 players at once, and you'd see what the other team was doing and so on and so forth. Well, Johnny Majors realized that if you had a light number on a fairly light jersey shot from up high in black and white, the other team would never know who the heck was who, and they really couldn't scout a guy. Well, we see the running back has the ball, but who is that? Is that Jones? Is it Smith? Is it whomever? And even though they have now put a little black outline around those numbers to try and make them a bit more legible, that is a Johnny Major gift to SEC broadcasters that lives on. Coach Majors knew what he wanted to do, and he was not going to make it easy on the opponents. So that's one that lives on. And I remember I'm going back to that first game at Auburn, and you know me, I can have a warped sense of humor in a nice way. We're
That's a good way to
sitting
put it.
we're sitting in the booth, going back to that first game at Auburn. I'm sitting in the Auburn broadcast booth with Jim. We're both leaned back in our chairs, and we were reading the newspaper, whatever paper was there, whether it was the Auburn Opelika paper or the Atlanta paper, whatever it was, we were reading it. And Jim's wife, God bless her, Rose, she was a wonderful lady. She walked into the booth at one point. We'd been sitting there about an hour and a half, and Rose walked into the booth. And to say hello to Jim, they had some friends who had come to the game because it was, the Alabama-Auburn game and the first one on the Auburn campus. She came into the booth just to say hello. She was by herself, though, at that time, and she and Jim talked a moment, and we said hi. We were friendly, and then she turns around to leave, and she says, "Okay, have a great day, sweetheart." Now, obviously, she was talking to Jim, but before Jim could answer, I jumped in. I said, "Okay, thanks, Rose. You too." And she spun around and said, "Why would I call you sweetheart?" And Jim just started cackling, and he said, "You don't want to mess with Rose on a game day, particularly against Alabama. She was a wonderful lady, and I knew she would eventually, understand I was just being me. But she's like, all right, have a great day, sweetheart." I said, "Okay, Rose, thanks. You too." And that's just a story that just popped back into my mind.
Having sat with you in the booth before a game, I can picture that completely.
Yeah, we're having a wonderful,
Yeah.
we're lucky to do what we do, and we're very serious. This is, our broadcasts are counted on by many. They're listened to with, with very, very fine-tuned ears, if you will. But at the same time, it's, we're at a ball game, we're having a good time, and that was just too good of a she set me up with a softball there, and I hit it out of the park, but she wasn't thrilled.
There you go.
She was a great lady, and Jim was one of my dearest friends. He really was.
And I think that's a good demonstration of the friendships that are born between SEC broadcasters, and it's something we had on our Alabama Insider podcast on RollTide.com, and you were able to take part in all 14 SEC football announcers coming together on a Zoom meeting and sharing memories. What can you tell us about that experience a couple weeks ago?
That was great. I mean, it was as good as the actual hour and 45 minutes was before we started. It was, very, very much a lot of fun as well. Everybody has stories. We have known these guys. We've known each other for years. On the football side, I am now the senior guy in the SEC. Well, actually, to be technically correct, I am, along with Mick Hubert at Florida, each in our 32nd year. But I did a season of hoops before my first football season, whereas Mick did not. So as far as using that as the barometer, I'm the senior guy who's involved with football. Now, guys like David Kellum and a few others have done baseball for longer than I've done football. So, but we're all, we've had a lot of time, a lot of stories to share. And, people think we just say stuff like this, but it's the truth. When I was doing, as you and I both do, we're blessed to do some of the SEC Network Plus games. And I was doing a baseball series last year against Ole Miss. And one of the games was rained out, or was delayed by rain. I forget, 3-4 innings in, and here came the rain. And after we, sent the broadcast back to our stations and did our responsibilities, David and I just sat down in the booth together, and not on the air. We just talked for hours. Same thing happened with Dave South a couple of years ago, the voice of Texas A&M before he retired. And he and I talked together and shared. He's a big RV guy and travels the country with his wife in their RV. So we genuinely like each other. Andy Burcham and I are dear friends. We text regularly. We talk a good bit. There's nobody in the conference that we don't get along with. So, and that's the truth. And I think it did come out on that deal. It looked like a very dysfunctional Hollywood Squares set. I know that, with all the guys all over the place. But we had a wonderful time, and we could have gone 4 and 5 hours because we didn't even touch the surface on stories that we all could have told.
Yeah, really entertaining. And again, I hope people check that out. It's available as well on all of our Crimson Tide Sports Network social media channels. Just a really fun conversation with you and a lot of people I've been blessed to know and work with before as well. And you got to be proud as well that you guys are passing it forward, and you got it from a generation before. Some real legends in this business like Kaywood Ledford, Kentucky, Larry Munson, Georgia, John Ward at Tennessee. The list goes on and on. So to be part of that has to be really fulfilling.
It is, Stan Torgerson, John Forney with us, so many of those guys who are just magnificent broadcasters. Let's face it, this is a small fraternity. You darn well better like who you're around. I mean, there are just a couple of handfuls of us basically in the SEC, so the job doesn't turn over all that often, and we do get a chance to build relationships. And you go into Fayetteville, and it was the great restaurant there where we enjoy eating at Herman's Rib House, and it was Mike Nail, the basketball broadcaster, who took us there for the first time. And then there's this one who gives us this recommendation and this and this, and can I come by? We went to Missouri the first time, and and those guys couldn't have been nicer. And, let's go get together. We had a function over at the country club. They hosted us as Bama visited Faurot Field in the first year in the SEC for Mizzou. So, yes, there's a very, very wonderful relationship. That arm, by the way, belongs to Claudette, who's just taking something off my printer here. But nice to see you, Claude. But yeah, it's a great relationship, and I listened to so many of these guys back in the old days. You weren't around yet, but they used to have the Pick of Dixie package. It was a radio syndication package. On Saturday nights, they would pick up a game from somewhere in the SEC and broadcast it on a network of stations. It was called the Pick of Dixie, and you'd get to hear. It was a precursor to Sirius XM, where you can hear everybody now. But you'd be able to hear the LSU broadcast and the old man Jack Crystal at Mississippi State, and because in those days, exclusive of that, you really couldn't hear the other guys. So this has been quite a line of noted broadcasters that have brought action to SEC fans over the years.
And when you mentioned your story with Jim Fife going to Auburn for the first time in '89, it made me wonder, have you ever had a travel close call around an Alabama football game, basketball game? Obviously, you haven't missed any of the games you've been broadcasting, but have there been any crazy travel stories you can give us now, years later?
The close calls have been with other sports. Alabama has been my priority. I never risked being anywhere close to missing a Bama game. The closest I ever got was going from Indianapolis to Denver. I was doing the Birmingham Bulls hockey games when they were in the old World Hockey Association back in the 70s and 80s. I was the radio voice of the Bulls. I was also the television voice of the St. Louis Blues of the National Hockey League. And the night I did a game in Indianapolis, went to sleep there, woke up the next morning, and that day I was going to do a game in Denver. And I had to fly from Indianapolis to Denver, no big deal under normal circumstances, but there was snow in both cities. There was snow in Indianapolis, there was snow in Denver, and you're at the mercy of weather, and you're at the mercy of them cleaning the runways off and so on. So that one was hair-raising, but I did get to Denver a couple of hours before the broadcast and made my way directly to the McNichols Arena, which was the home ice at the time where the Nuggets and the then Colorado Rockies hockey team played. So I made it right to McNichols Arena. Um, one thing we did do, but we knew it was going to happen. I had to go probably as far as you could possibly go and still be in the United States from one end to the other. Alabama played in Miami, and I believe it was called the Blockbuster Bowl against Colorado umpteen years ago. The next day, Bama began playing in the Hawaii basketball tournament. Well, the football game started late by design. It was televised, and the TV network said we're going to kick at 8 o'clock or whatever it was. We do the game. I get back to the hotel. It's like 2 and change. I sleep for an hour and a half. Get up, fly to or drive to the Miami International Airport, and then fly from there to Dallas-Fort Worth to Honolulu. Well, long flight. Well, we had an idea that, there were risks involved there. So we sent Tom Roberts, we all remember Tom, we sent Tom Roberts out to Honolulu ahead of me. He went with the team. So he was already out there. If I didn't show up, well, Tom would do the play-by-play. We hired an engineer out there, so Tom Stipe didn't have to come with me and risk another person being delayed. We hired a guy by the name of Hugo Buring. I'll never forget that name. Nice guy, long hair, but they did a wonderful job. Well, anyway, I fly and land on time in Honolulu. And at this point, it was about an hour before tip. In those days, though, we had like maybe a 15-minute radio pregame show, if that much. So I get to, I believe I accidentally muted myself there.
We're hearing that.
Good. I get to, I get out there. Did I do something to my video too? Or am I
No,
okay?
we still see you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
So I get out there. I run. I carried my luggage on. I ran to the cab stand, got a cabbie, and the gentleman did not speak good English. He did not speak good English. I said, "Take me to the basketball arena." And he looked at me. And I went like this, simulating a basketball shot. And I said, "University of Hawaii, basketball." Well, he took me to the University of Hawaii's basketball arena. Unfortunately, that's not where we were playing. We were playing at the Blaisdell Arena, if I remember the name, in downtown Honolulu. Long story short, I get there. I probably walked into the gym about 8 minutes before tip-off. And Tom was already on the air. I mean, I literally walked in. I had my papers, my attaché case in one hand and my suitcase in the other. I put them down behind my chair, sat down, put my papers out, put the headset on, and we tipped. So, again, we were covered. We knew that it was going to be a tight connection, but that one was could have been problematic. There was one night I remember I did a NASCAR race in Florida. It was the night, this would have been in 1991. It was the night that Alabama played a night game and lost 35-0 to the Florida Gators, which, as it turned out then, was the last game that Bama would lose for the longest time. Of course, they went on to win the national title in 92. But anyway, we did this night game in Gainesville, and I had to be on the air doing a NASCAR race in Dover, Delaware, starting at noon on Sunday. And I ended up having to charter somebody's or use somebody's private plane. One of the NASCAR folks was kind enough to let me, I had to pay for it, but they allowed me to use it. And it was not the fastest plane. It was not a jet or anything like that, but it had propellers and it got me where I was going. And so I got off the air, went to the Gainesville airport, flew to the Delaware Air Park in Dover, Delaware, where they had left me a car. I got to the hotel. I slept for about 45 minutes and got up, shaved and showered, and went to the racetrack. And now we're on the air. And again, I had very little sleep. I don't sleep well on the private planes. I do on commercial airlines, but I don't sleep well on a private aircraft. And we were doing the race, and it came time for a station identification at the top of the hour at 1 o'clock Eastern. We had to do a station ID. Well, the words that we used on the Crimson Tide Sports Network to pitch to a station ID were identical to what Motor Racing Network used. The only difference was, let's pause 10 seconds for station identification. This is the Crimson Tide Sports Network, or this is MRN, the Motor Racing Network. Well, I get to that 1 o'clock ID, and I started to say Crimson Tide Sport. I said, and then I said, I stopped after the letter C, and I caught myself, and I did the ID for MRN, and that scared me straight. That woke me up for the rest of the day. But so I had no trouble getting there, but I had seemingly just signed off, 9-10 hours ago in Gainesville, and I was on now in Dover, Delaware, and that scared the heck out of me. But but there have been some, close calls, but and in football, I think we've talked about it. The one time when Snake and I had to abandon our car, it was in Auburn, and there was a big accident somewhere on one of the roads, and it was clear we weren't going to make it to the stadium in time. David Crane was working with us at the time. David's now the voice of the UAB Blazers, but he ended up signing us on and doing some of the pregame while Snake and I walked to Jordan-Hare. Now, I'm not the greatest walker in America. It's just kind of, not my thing if I can help it. Why walk if you can ride? And Snake, of course, had the bad hips, the bad knees. He even under ideal circumstances, Kenny didn't walk well. So it took us a while, and of course, Snake is signing autographs and posing for pictures as he would. So when we got there, the network was already on the air. David Crane had ably stepped in and signed us on and was steering the ship until we got alongside him.
That's certainly a good story. And you mentioned your association for many years with NASCAR, and I have to imagine being the voice of Alabama football, when you would talk to drivers, you have drivers who are fans of all teams throughout the country and the SEC. That had to make some really interesting conversations you guys would have around the racetrack.
It did, because you had fans, you drivers who were, like you say, fans of everybody. I'd walk in, a lot of the guys didn't know what had happened the day before. How'd the Tide do? What's going, what's the latest? And then, it would be Bama and Sterling Marlin, Bama and Tennessee, and Sterling Marlin was the biggest Tennessee fan. And, the week before he'd start giving me garbage and I'd start giving it right back to him. And then depending upon how the game went, Alabama often won. So I'd make a beeline for that Kodak car, and he'd try and hide from me because he didn't want to hear from me. And if Tennessee happened to win the game, I wouldn't go anywhere near that Morgan McClure-owned machine. I didn't want to hear his crap. So, so there's a lot of that. The Kentucky fans with the Waltrip family and so many others. But yes, there was always a lot of healthy respect. It's funny. We always used to laugh about that, but we'd walk into Starkville to the stadium on a Saturday morning, and there was a young man standing outside holding a Goodyear Racing Eagle. He had stood out near the press entrance, didn't even have a ticket to the game. He wanted me to autograph this tire. He must have had, 40 or 50 autographs on it. Turns out he had a man cave at home, and he had a couple of Goodyear tires that he had secured, stacked one on top of the other, and then he got a glazier to cut a big round piece of glass so you could see right through it to all the autographs, and that was the table in his man cave, and he wanted me to autograph it too. And we walk in, and there he is waiting for us outside the stadium with a Goodyear tire. And then I remember us walking into the Carrier Dome in Syracuse for basketball. Bama played up there, and Tom Stipe and I were at courtside. It was plenty early. Tom was setting up his gear, and I was doing whatever. And then all of a sudden, here comes a stampede of students. They opened the gates, and of course the students came running down to their seats. And this guy who I never knew, haven't had any idea who he was, starts yelling my name. Eli, come here, Eli. And then, now I had, they're now deceased, but I had relatives in Syracuse. I didn't recognize this gentleman, but I thought maybe he was a friend of my aunt and uncle and whatever. So I walk over, and the guy says, I said, yes, sir, what can I do for you? He goes, tell me about Bill Elliott and what he's going to do this year, and yada, 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 yada. So there were people who wanted to talk NASCAR at Alabama events. There are also tons of folks who wanted to talk Alabama at NASCAR events. So it went both ways.
Certainly good stories. And as we start to wrap things up, again, it's starting to feel a little bit more like football season with just the fact that you will be on the network coming up this upcoming Saturday. Just again, if you could recap for some people that may have joined us later on what's coming up this Saturday where you'll be from the Lodge.
Yeah, we're going to be at the Lodge at Gulf State Park in Orange Beach, in Gulf Shores, actually. And it'll be a 2-hour talk show starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. Going until noon, and it's a different time for a talk show, obviously, but so many of our stations now carry those Saturday replay of the games, the classic games that we've talked about, and many of them air them from noon until 3 Saturday. So we didn't want to go head-to-head against ourselves. We didn't want to start at 3 o'clock till 5 because folks are doing this, that, and the other. So we decided to do the show from 10 until noon on Saturday of this week. And, we'll be live from the Lodge at Gulf State Park. Our guests are going to be on the phone. So as much as we'd love to see you, and you're certainly welcome to come by, I'll be there. Tom Stipe will be there. Our boss, Jim Carabin, and Tom Brooks, one of our very capable administrators, assistant GM and salesperson, he'll be there. But the guests are all going to be on the phone. But we'll have speakers so you can hear the show. And we've got an outstanding guest list. Dr. Bell, the university president, Greg Byrne, our athletic director, the chief medical officer for the NCAA, Dr. Brian Hainline, will be there. Along with them, we've got Reese Davis from ESPN. Bob Baumhauer is going to stop by. Of course, Nick Saban will be on the show. John Parker Wilson and Rashad Johnson. All of that crammed into 2 hours. And we will take your phone calls. The phones will be open, so you'll be welcome to call in and talk and throw questions at our guests. So it should be a lot of fun. So our regular station lineup on the Crimson Tide Sports Network, we certainly hope you can tune in for that. And I'm looking forward to seeing Tom Stipe with a mask on. I understand he looks far better with a mask on than he does normally. So that'll be nice.
That sounds accurate to me. Well, yeah. Eli, this past half hour or so has been a lot of fun. Just thank you for your time. We're looking forward to Saturday's show already. Just thanks for your time. Be well. Roll Tide.
You too. Take care. Everybody take good care of yourselves and roll Tide.
All right. That has been Eli Gold joining us for Quarantine Q&A presented by Alabama One Insurance. Thanks for watching, everyone.